Most five-stage founders have handed off work. Almost none has fully handed off the thinking that determines whether the work was the right work to do. That gap between what moves and what stays is where ownership breaks down, and it breaks in predictable places and for structural reasons. This video names them. Today, we're going to take a look at what ownership actually requires, the three places it breaks down, why execution reverts to the founder, the thinking gap, what never gets handed off, what reversions looks like in practice, and what ownership looks like when it holds. What ownership actually requires. The distinction that opens this video, responsibility says, I will do this work. Ownership says, I will make sure the outcome is right, and I have the authority to do what it takes to make that happen. First, clarity about what the outcome actually is, not what the task is, what done looks like. Without outcome clarity, the founder becomes the arbiter of whether the outcome was reached, which makes them the decision maker, not the team member. Second, authority to make the calls that determine the outcome. A person responsible for a task without the authority to decide how the task gets done isn't an owner. They're an executor, waiting for approval. Clarity without authority is frustrating, and both are required. Third, the confidence that the decision won't be reversed. Even with clarity and authority, ownership breaks down the moment the team learns that the decision gets second guessed. The expectation of reversal is enough to prevent real ownership from forming. The three places ownership breaks down. Ownership doesn't collapse all at once. It breaks at specific, predictable points, each sending work back to the founder in a different form. At the edge of the documented process, when the situation doesn't fit the template, the team hits a wall. Without authority and confidence, escalation happens instead of a decision. What do I do here? At the moment of a competing priority, two things are both urgent, both within scope. Only one can happen first. Without clarity about what matters more, escalation happens rather than a decision. Which one should I do first? At the first sign of client friction, the client pushes back and asks for something outside of scope or signals dissatisfaction. This is where ownership is most tested and most often fails. Without confidence, authority, and clarity, the default is the same. Let me check with the founder. Let me check with the owner. Three different moments, one structural cause. That's the diagnostic. The thinking gap. What never gets handed off? Look at the two columns on the screen. What gets handed off? The task itself, the process for completing. Look at the two columns on the screen. What gets handed off? The task itself, the process for completing it, the deadline, access to tools and resources, sometimes the quality standard. What stays with the founder? Why this task matters at this moment, what it connects to in the larger picture, what to do when it doesn't go as planned, how to balance it against competing priorities, what the client actually needs versus what they ask for. The founder fills in the thinking gap by default, which means they're doing the most important part of every delegated job, even the ones they've delegated. The invisible double involvement is what the workbook is designed to surface. Where exactly does that thinking stay? And what does it reveal about where ownership hasn't transferred? Workbook 2, where decisions bottlenecks actually form, is a workbook you can find at majority.academy. It's going to allow you to be able to walk through this on your own and move at your own pace. Why execution reverts to the founder. Reversion is a visible symptom of the thinking gap, and it happens in predictable patterns. First, when something goes off plan, the team had the task. They didn't have the thinking about what to do when the task stopped working as expected. So it returns. Not because they failed, but because the context for what they had to do next never moved with the work. Second, when the stakes feel higher than the team authority covers, when the client is unhappy, when a deadline is at risk, when a decision could have consequences, the team calculates whether their authority actually covers the situation. If there's any doubt, they return it. Third, when a previous decision was reversed, a single reversal recalibrates the team's sense of what ownership actually means in this business. They update towards asking more, which was the rational response to the information they received. But it's to your detriment as the owner and the founder. What ownership looks like when it holds. The signal isn't perfection, it's direction. When ownership holds, decisions start returning as questions and start arriving as outcomes. The founder's role shifts from resolver to reviewer. When a team brings you a result, not a problem, that's the signal. When you hear about the decision that was made rather than being asked to make it, that's ownership holding. Whether that shift has already happened in your business and where it hasn't yet is exactly what the workbook examines. Summary. 4 takeaways. 1. Ownership requires 3 things. All 3. Clarity about what the outcome is, authority to make the calls to get there, and confidence the decision won't be reversed. Missing any one breaks ownership at the same predictable points. 2. The thinking gap. The thinking gap is what the founder never hands off. Task transfer. The why. The context. The judgment about whether the work was the right work. These stay. The founder fills the thinking gap by default, even when the work is being delegated. 3. Reversion. Reversion often looks like the founder succeeding, editing the output, handling the difficult call, being copied on everything. Each is the founder staying in the outcome, which confirms to the team that the founder is still the owner. 4. When ownership holds, the founder hears about the decisions, not the problems. The team brings results and outcomes, not questions and escalations. That's the signal to watch out for. That's the shift. And that shift in what comes back to you is what the next video is about. What changes when the founder stops carrying and starts leading? I'm going to bring it back around to this quote. Task transfer. Thinking doesn't. The founder fills in the thinking gap by default, which means they're doing the most important part of every delegated job. And if you're doing the most important part of every delegated job, then you haven't really handed anything off. Are you ready to see where ownership breaks down? I'm going to bring it back around the workbook too, where decision bottlenecks actually form. This is where you examine the three breakdown points in your own business. What is the first sign of client friction come back to you? What is the competing priorities still default to your desk? The workbook is where you find the specific answers. I'm also going to invite you to take the leverage versus labor diagnostic. It's a free assessment that shows you whether your current delegation structure is producing leverage or just better organized versions of the same workload. The link will be in the description. And if you found this helpful, like, share, and subscribe, and drop thinking in the comments so that I know that you found this helpful. I'll see you in the next episode.